like the idea that a filmmaker can just take their own money and just shoot something in their house or like in the forest and get a real reaction from the audience. So when COVID happened, I knew that I wanted to do that. It just felt like fun to go off and do something like that. But I also had been looking at photogrammetry, which is the technology that I use for the VR stuff, to use, do you know my Oat Studios stuff? Do you know Oat Studios? So if you go, it's actually on Netflix now, it just got put on Netflix. So it's OATS Studios, right? So they're like experimental films that I've been making for about 5 years. And I just do whatever I want, basically. And so originally, I wanted to use photogrammetry in Oat Studio. So for a year, I was like looking at how to use it and what story I would use it for. And then when the pandemic happened, and this idea of doing something like Paranormal Activity, I just took that, and instead of doing it for YouTube, I put it into the movie. And when you combine photogrammetry, which is kind of like VR, and demonic possession, kind of like Paranormal Activity, you get that result. And that's what happened. So it wasn't like I was trying to do something that was, unusual. Honestly, the only place I really want to work is Oat Studios. I just want to do that stuff. But the problem is it needs millions of dollars that have to come from somewhere, because we just gave all the stuff away for free, right? So it has no way really of currently of sustaining itself, although there are very interesting ways that I may be able to do that in future. But if I could figure out how to make stuff to give the audience for free on YouTube in Oat Studios, that's what I would do all the time. If I could pick, it would be that. But if you're in the realm of normal filmmaking, which would be either high budget studio or low budget demonic, I would pick studio all the time. Because the restrictions, the creative restrictions that studios put on you is actually, it's very limited, It's not, I think if you do something where you're working on huge IP, if you were working on Marvel maybe, or I don't know, some other thing that I wouldn't do, you would get constrained by the studio a lot more. But if you look at the films that I've made, because they're very much me, the studio, it's limited what the studio is doing to you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what you're getting is you're getting tens of millions of dollars of budget that you can really do, you can show the audience something interesting. So I think I would pick that over smaller self-finance stuff like demonic, because you don't have the resources to really make it big. But I would still put both of those over to the side and only do Oats if I could. I think it's harder because the studio has a certain idea of how they think a very valuable piece of property needs to be treated. But at the same time, it's also up to the filmmaker to remix that for the audience in a way that's fresh or that is a little bit different. But I would say that with RoboCop and with Alien, it was not a case of creativity that those fell apart. I actually think that both of them could have been made pretty close to the way that I wanted to make them if I had just seen them through. RoboCop was in my control in the way that it fell apart, and Alien was not in my control in the way that it fell apart. Yeah, this was the latter of those two, which is not the normal way that it would go, and it was because, like I was saying before, it was like I had spent a year. I mean, I love computer graphics in general, and I really love the idea of photogrammetry, especially where I think it's going to go, like where it's going to end up going in future. So I knew I wanted to use it somehow, and with Oat Studios, it would have been really easy because I could just do whatever, right? Like with putting it into something that's more of a feature film, it needs to comfortably fit into the story in a way that the audience would accept it. And because photogrammetry is so new and it looks very glitchy, I thought the way to do it would be to write it into the story as though it was prototype technology. It was glitchy within this story. So the movie was definitely a case of, let me create the story and the characters around wanting to drop people into this environment, and that's that came first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how did you communicate with your DP the idea of this photogrammetry? Because it looked bananas to me to be a director and tell the DP this has to look like this. And
you know what was interesting was actually the DP had nothing to do with it, because live action, obviously you're dealing with a normal DP in a normal situation, but when you're in that photogrammetry situation, I think filmmaking in the 21st century will begin, it's already beginning to evolve like this, where you'll see really big DPs that are involved in something like, you know, what Weta Digital or what ILM is doing. But that's a new development, right? Because normally what happens is it would be the CG lighting department mixed with the director and mixed with the visual effects supervisor that would actually light how those scenes look. And so in the case of Demonic, what happened was we did normal live action photography, and then we went into this insane photogrammetry space where you have 250 4K cameras that are like in a cage. It's awful for the actors. And what you actually try to do is you try to light them literally in the most diffuse way that you can possibly light them, right? You remove all shadows. There's no hard shadows anywhere. And you put them in an environment that almost feels like pre-lighting. It's as free of lighting as possible. Mm-hmm. Then you take them and you drop them into your CG environment, and then we could have had a DP in the virtual camera part, but we just didn't. So it was a combination of the VFX supervisor and me lighting stuff. And like for example, when she goes and sees her mom, with the first simulation, right? She gets loaded into her childhood house in the daylight. So I knew I wanted it to be daylight. So it's like, okay, let's just pick our sun angle. And then when she goes into the house, when she gets to her mom's room, I wanted this like Blade Runner orange light coming through the blinds. So I said that, like, I want this kind of orange thing happening with shadows coming into the room. Let's see what that looks like. And then the lighting artists in the VFX company will do a few different examples of what that could look like, right? And then I'll pick the one that I kind of feel like I like, and then we sort of hone in on it. And we just did that for each one of the setups.
Yeah, it's a totally different process.
Yeah. It's not a conscious choice. It's more like just the way that I seem to do it naturally is that it seems to come from other things that are not films. So any one of the films that I've made, in the case of Demonic, it's like the idea really is, like I was saying before, it's more than Blair Witch or Paranormal. It's more the idea of a filmmaker self-financing something. That was more high on the list than the actual thing. You know, in District 9, it was about this. It was about the history of apartheid and the movement of illegal aliens in Southern Africa into South Africa. So there's no film to point to with that. And Elysium is about wealth inequality. And Chappie is fucking insane. I mean, I don't know what I would reference with Chappie. So my own process is it doesn't come from looking at other films, but then later, when I look back on stuff, it's like it's obviously influenced by things that have influenced me, you know. So it's weird. Demonic is weird though. It's not easy for me in Demonic to point to something and go, "This comes from that," you know. But I think there's tropes that are easy to point to, like the nightmare scene when you have the guy, you know, you have her friend Sam, who's actually, in the moment that it turns into the demon, is played by a guy from Toronto who's an amazing contortionist. There's no CG in that. He just did that. He ran around upside down. Yeah. And that feels like The Exorcist, right? Like with her coming down the stairs upside down. So when I was doing it, I didn't think that. But when you look back on it, it's like, well, it's demonic possession. And like, you know, I'm sure there's something lodged in the back of my head. Or it's the trope of it, the bigger horror trope, maybe. I don't know. I literally cannot explain how much I hate 3D. Like there are literally not enough words for me to explain how much I hate that shit. I don't know how. I mean, if it was my favorite filmmaker in the world and my favorite film was about to come out and it was in 3D, I wouldn't watch it. I literally wouldn't watch it. I would wait until it was like, you know, presented in 2D somewhere. And even then I would think, a lot of effort of this went into the 3D bullshit part of it that wasn't in the actual movie. I think the best imaging, I think the best presentation of films in the world would be somewhere between either what Chris Nolan is doing with IMAX, or, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of film. I'm more of a huge fan of whatever the most modern imaging technology is. So if it's something more along the lines of like an 8K or 16K camera system that's actually greater than film resolution of IMAX negatives, that's what I would be interested in. Presented in an IMAX theater with like Dolby Atmos, like that's I would go down that road. But 3D is like, I don't know what, I literally cannot watch it. I mean, and if studios try to push it on filmmakers because they think it's important, which thank God is starting to end now, it's like, you just, it can't even be a discussion. You got to just leave the film, I think, if they start saying that. I think the way that it feels, I think if you look at something like Dune, just very well shot, extremely high resolution with expert visual effects, I think that's where it's going. I mean, I think if you go 10 or 15 years down the line, what ironically is in this small horror film with photogrammetry, I think that you could see the use of photogrammetry being used a lot in the way that you capture your actors. If you're doing something in the realm of sci-fi or fantasy, if you're doing normal live-action drama, you shouldn't use it. But absolutely, using photogrammetry, using very good CG environments, combining them, and then presenting them two-dimensionally in incredibly high resolution is hopefully the future. And I think probably the way that it will go, because audiences don't want that shit. They don't want the 3D. Well, when I was starting off, I was an animator in 3D graphics, and I really love 3D graphics. I mean, as evidenced by the fact that photogrammetry is in this film. So one of my favorite things is building 3D environments that you can drop audiences into, which is why I absolutely love real-time 3D. Like Unreal 5 and that kind of technology is very, very interesting to me. And when you combine it with sound, it's fascinating to me. So if I go back to when I was working in visual effects as an animator, there was almost like a fork in the road where one fork is film and the other fork is the games industry. And working in film, I've just always watched games and the whole industry of games and being very interested in what they're doing. And so now with Gunzilla, it's like I have an actual, I'm part of a company actually making something pretty awesome and being hands-on with it, which is very cool. But I think in future, I think that there's, like when you're asking about the question about the future of presentation of movies, I think that what'll happen is exactly what we were just saying, which is that movies and film are passive audience experiences where you sit and you are told something, right? And the better the movie is, the more you're being told something with meaning behind it. And the worse the movie is, obviously there's no meaning. It's like a studio blockbuster and there's no nutritional value. And I think that games are the exact opposite of that. What gamers, I think, want is they want to be dropped into an environment where they have agency over the environment and can do what they want to do. You can set up narrative goals that they could go after, which is more like mystery, like they're solving things, but there are two totally different things, like in my mind at least. I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm saying the way I think of it is gamers want to be dropped into an environment and they want to do shit like Grand Theft Auto 5, or they want to be playing PUBG, or they want some kind of a puzzle kind of logic thing that they need to crack. And none of those are the same as being a passive audience and having an emotional experience from a story told to you by hopefully a good storyteller. I think it'll be a case of the prices are coming down so drastically on technology in general that I think having a 100-inch 8K monitor in everyone's house is very realistic soon. And people want good speakers and they want an environment where they want an environment where they can watch something, not at all the same as a theater, but it still can be a good environment. So I'm not sure. I think if people don't pay attention and they're watching it on their phone or something, it's not good. But there are a lot of people that do watch stuff at home correctly, I think. But it still sucks that it isn't the movie-going experience, which is my favorite thing.